All right, everybody, it's our Klaus here, and I've got an amazing video for you today. Very wide range of topics that we'll get to delve into, and really I feel that most of this is going to revolve around the idea of us just constantly being mocked at every turn in this world, not only throughout the mainstream media and the entertainment industries, but also throughout our political and religious organizations, as well as by many of the policies that make up the society that we live in. I also want to talk about in particular some of the drug policies that I find I have issue with, and what I feel they have to do with the ever worsening drug epidemic here in the United States, and the role that cannabis plays in all of that. And so a lot to get into, and to really start things off here, as stated, I do want to look at this very occult-ridden segment from Colbert's Late Show that aired just a couple of nights ago, and they posted it on the 16th here, as I'll point out, very important in just a moment. But again, very critical, because on this same episode we have the director Jordan Peele, who directed the film Get Out. And so again, I did a video on that very recently here that I advised you look into. I'll glaze over just a little bit of it here as we go on, but I highly advise you check out the full bit. So notice here, this segment is a riff on Roy Moore, the automated calls going out, trying to defend him and just discredit any agency or person promoting the story about him, and his relations with younger girls when he was younger himself, again, old enough to know better still. But Colbert, of course, has a riff on it, and we have this nice Jewish bit where it's a rabbi, and he's calling on behalf of the Star of David Times. So notice he's looking for any damaging information about Roy Moore that can be used for the vast Jewish conspiracy, right? Wink, wink. And so again, we'll get into why that is, such a glaring, just, kind of slap to everybody's face. But then you have the laugh lined out afterwards. We'll send you 10,000 bagels. And so again, everybody laughs. And then you go on here though, and it says, please call me at 1666, right? Wink. And then oi, again, laugh line. Now, let's break down a bit why I feel like they are laughing at so many different things here. So the very first bit is to look into the Star of David itself, right? Because this is prominently displayed throughout this whole segment here. And so when we look into it, you see very quickly its connections to this, right, Mark of the Beast number 666. So all the different ways that you can break that down, and so they're listed out for you here a bit more. And I'll leave you all of these links here, as there is a tremendous amount to look into. But you can see as well from this book here, The Six-Pointed Star, written by Dr. O.J. Graham, that he is alleged to have proved that the symbol was never used by King David of Israel, and so the name Star of David is a misnomer. The symbol was chosen in 1947 for the flag of the fledgling nation of Israel at the insistence of the Rothschilds. So now there is an immense amount of research that people have done on this, that I highly advise you look into. As again, this is only a preliminary glance, and again, it goes much deeper, and we're focusing on the hexagram only really for this. So notice here, you can see some of the kind of history on this, on how it came to be associated with the Jewish people, first offered to them by the Viennese Jesuits in 1648 by demand of German Emperor Ferdinand III, who wished to bestow upon them the flag of honor for their help in the 30 Years' War. So you can see, though, that it started to grow, but many rabbis strongly opposed the use of the hexagram because it was a pagan symbol. But since Mayor Rothschild adopted the hexagram to mark his house, this symbol gained popularity among the Jews. Ironically, the Rothschilds do not have Jewish roots and do not practice Judaism. In 1897, the hexagram became the symbol of the Zionist movement, which was funded by the Rothschilds and had a kin relation to Freemasonry. can see here in a book called The Second Mile, revealing the six-pointed star as a very ancient symbol and one of the most powerful and very prevalent throughout Freemasonry. So as with all of this, you can easily keep researching for yourself to see how this comes up. Now, notice down below here, it says it's also related to the worship of Saturn. So again, this primary planet and a lot of the Masonic programming, and again, Luciferian worship. So also interesting with this, because Crowley will come up, is his Brotherhood of Saturn, which again, like the Brotherhood of the Freemasons, has its 33 degrees. And so just again, over and over how these people and places just all overlap. But notice as well the hexagram being used in Baal worship. So again, another ancient deity, very prevalent in Masonic writings. So notice here, hexagram used in magic, witchcraft, sorcery, occultism, alchemy, and astrology. And according to former Satanist Bill Schnoebelen, a hexagram must be present to call forth a demon, and it is a very powerful tool to invoke Satan. Goes on to say that the word hex, as to put a hex on someone, derives from the word hexagram, right? So again, critical. Very, very important to think about. Now, it notes down here, Helena Blavatsky. Now, remember, not only is she a founder of the Theosophical Society, but also a huge player in the Lucis Trust organization. So again, that connected to the Temple of Understanding and the United Nations, another huge set of information we just put a video out on. So again, all of that, and we're just looking at this importance of this hexagram. And I also want you to see, for those of you, not familiar with this whole, Jesuits, Zionism, Rothschilds, is a link to get you started on it. Lord knows, as I'm saying, there's a tremendous amount of research out there. You can see their use of the Hegelian dialectics. Again, concept that can be kind of complex to some, so I actually would recommend a channel, Citizen of Gotham. For those of you not familiar with him, I've actually done a number of talks with him in the past, and he's a great researcher, very informative, so he does talk about this at length in some of his videos. So lots of information to bring you further up to speed with this. Now, let's stay in tune with everything here. So what I wanted to show you, let's stay in tune with this hexagram 666 bit for a minute. So you've got this going on, the 666 and Oi coming up there, right? So what I wanted to do is break down the coding for that. Now, before I get into this top bit here, do notice for Oi, it is the same coding, not only as United Nations, but also Willis Tower and a number of other very important things, including the number 37, which again is the value of hex or hell. It's the same as LAX as well, which I was talking about in my most recent video previous to this. But so for Willis Towers, again, another landmark piece we've talked about, building so large it has its own zip code, right? 60606, drop those zeros, and you've just got this nice pattern emerging with these 666s, right? And so let's connect this further though with Jordan Peele, right? Because he's on this show and it's November 16th when they're posting all of this. And so do note, when we break down November 16th, it does turn into a 111 times 6. And so there you have our nice 666 once again, right? So now let's remind you why we did the video on Get Out. It's because solely for the reason of the line, the next 9/11 is going to be on some geriatric shit. And so that is said by a character named Rod Williams, whose coding is the same as Prophet of Destruction, final United States President, as well as these ideas of terrorism, thelemic order. And so do even notice back here on Oi, right? Do what thou wilt. Crowley's kind of supreme tenet of thelema there. Again, something written in doublespeak, not to mean at all what it's perceived to mean on the surface. But again, with Rod Williams here, another reference to the Rothschilds, and all of these pieces. But so to get into the phrase that we looked at, you have some geriatric shit, which is 17 letters, and so the 17th tarot card is the star. And then with that, the coding is the same as Satanic hexagram. And so again, my big pull here is not only, right, Jordan Peele on this show, but it's the same episode where we have this bit going on. And this is the connection from his movie, okay? So check it out. Some geriatric shit. It's also the same as the Willis Tower, as well as the second 9/11 and President Trump, right? And so all of this further, get out itself, right? Both words, 3 letters. You can have a nice 33 there. 6 letters total, right? Hexagram reference again for get out. But the coding, look, Trump, the New Age, and messages, okay? The Path of Cheth, this is the 7th tarot card, right? 7 letters like oi. But so all of that, so very fascinating. Jordan Peele himself, same coding as Zionism, Masonry, 9/11, Brothers, again, the 6th tarot card. You can see all of this just continues to stack upon itself, okay? And, you know, again, dismiss all you want for those who are still critical in the audience right now. But this is one of the underlayers that, you know, really has to be taken into consideration, I feel, to understand how this all really is entwined with itself, all right? So again, there's that information for you on the right side of your screen. Let's jump back to the left here. But I guess there's one other thing before we do. With all these references to President Trump, the hexagram, second 9/11, I do want you to see again on this Enough is Enough card, all of these triangles, right? So again, the hexagram representing that idea of the fusing of masculine and feminine energy, or the opposing sides of something, creating this singularity. It's really interesting to think about, right? You have them before that point here when they're still opposed, and right, this arguably Trump bit being assassinated here. So very, very compelling stuff with this hexagram usage here, as well as its coding. As I say, it's something I feel is really, really worth further contemplation here, especially with these just important connections to Crowley, and you can see them on both sides of your screen here. Liber 77 coming up in all of this, as well as my name. Huge pieces. But so let's keep going though. All right. So with all of that being said, back to the coding for Oi, right? 7 letters, number of points on Crowley's Mark of the Beast, the Seal of Babylon, huge things we've talked about with that number. But notice as well, it's the same as Satan, New World Order, and the largest government conspiracy of all time. Now, bearing in mind, right, that this is the backdrop that all of this is, right, the coding is taking place for, and this reference to the vast Jewish conspiracy, okay? So it's very interesting that that comes up the way it does. So now notice here as well, governments are hiding the truth about cannabis. So this is really where I want to kind of go off course a little bit and show you some of this so you can see how they're mocking us in a different way, right? That's not in the mainstream. That this is just part of what makes up our society. Now, you see here, this is a list from the DEA of the schedule listing of substances in the U.S. And up top here are substances said to be highly abusive in their potential risk and are not currently accepted to have any medicinal use. Now, you can see that cannabis is placed up there, and immediately you think, well, there's medicinal marijuana. How is that possible? And it's still a Schedule 1 drug. And so, it's a great question. Let's look into how these stack up with some of these other drugs here, and we're going to build this case for looking at the current drug epidemic here in the US, and how the actual scheduling of the drugs helps to facilitate the ever-growing just domination of that. All right, so again, for cannabis here, let's pull up the DEA drug sheet on it. And what we really want to look for here are the negative effects, right? The overdose effects. And it is very clearly listed here No death from overdose of marijuana has been reported. So notice they don't even list any side effects. They don't say drowsiness. They don't say confusion. They don't say cottonmouth, anything like that. Nothing. So we also have here this very interesting bit. You have the Drug Awareness Warning Network annual report published by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. Contains a statistical compilation of all drug deaths which occur in the U.S. And according to this report, there has never been a death recorded from the use of cannabis. In fact, many studies showed it's physically impossible for a human to die from a cannabis overdose. So now why this is important is because as we continue to look at these other substances that are said to actually have medicinal benefit, we're going to look at how they actually are very harmful and can kill the individual instead. All right, so let's keep building here. And so you look at the next one that we have, DEA fact sheet. This is for oxycodone. And so refresher, it is not Schedule 1. It is Schedule 2. Oxycodone's right down here. Look who one of its neighbors is. Fentanyl. One of the drugs just ripping through everything right now. On the rise. Notice as well. It's just amazing what is in this lower category here. And again, the idea is that the benefit of these drugs outweighs the consequence. But look what's listed. Methamphetamine. All right. And again, that's what is in the ADHD medications is a form of amphetamine. And so that to me is very troublesome, right? Cocaine, Vicodin, all of these are considered to be more beneficial, less dangerous to the individual than something such as cannabis. But so let's go back here to our DEA drug sheet for oxycodone. Overdose effects include extreme drowsiness, confusion, shallow breathing, slow heart rate, fainting, coma, and possible death. Well, it sounds a lot harsher than the overdose effects listed here for cannabis. Well, let's keep going, though. Narcotics, all right? Let's look at our heroin. Let's look at our Vicodins, our morphines, methadones, fentanyl. What's that all about? Overdoses of narcotics are not uncommon and can be fatal. So that's the opening line. Overdoses of narcotics are not uncommon and can be fatal. That's a really polite way of saying that they are common and are often fatal. Look at these side effects: confusion, convulsions, extreme drowsiness, slow breathing, and the common fatality, right? So what's very interesting is, again, we go back to our schedules here, right? And most of those drugs that were listed are down here. Heroin is the only narcotic that makes its way up into the Schedule 1, all right? And it seems rightfully so. Now, you look over here. Let's look at our benzodiazepines, right? Everybody's favorite family, typically. You have your Klonopins, your Xanax, your Valiums, right? Effects of overdose include, what do we have? Coma, possible death, shallow respiration, right? All these negatives. Let's look at the amphetamines, right? Our meth, our ADHD medications. Overdoses include agitation, hallucinations, convulsions, and possible death. Now, one of the big counter arguments that they try to have against cannabis is, right, developmentally, if you give it to somebody too young, it can be very problematic. And I say it is very, very easy to show that use of any of these substances instead is far more problematic for the developing human than any of these synthetic chemicals that are put forward to them. Again, bearing in mind that our brains have naturally occurring CBD neurotransmitter receptors in them. So it's very important, again, to keep all of this in mind. You look at these Schedule 1 drugs. And, a number of them are simply mind-expanding drugs, right? Ones that elevate one's frequency and elevate one's ability to see past the limitations imposed upon them in this very restrictive world. And frankly, LSD and peyote, to say they're habit forming seems like a logical fallacy in taking a minority reporting of people and presenting as the majority of people. Typically, right, those spiritual experiences are very important and something that is not taken lightly. But so something to also just keep in mind, not everything is just listed as Schedule 2 that we were looking at, right? Because down here we have our Xanax, our Valiums, right? Schedule 4 drugs, much lower potential of abuse and risk of dependence, right? They're saying that about Xanax and Valium. It's amazing. It's amazing, right? But that cannabis is the Schedule 1. And again, you look at these are their fact sheets on this. Now, what is going on? Well, there's a lot of different ways, right, that we can look at this. So let's take a look at this article from the Washington Post showing why pharmaceutical companies are fighting legal marijuana. So this is very fascinating. This is a study released in the Journal of Health Affairs showing clear evidence of a missing link in the causal chain running from medical marijuana to falling overdoses. Now, they found that in the 17 states with medical marijuana law in place by 2013, prescriptions for painkillers and other classes of drugs fell sharply compared with states that did not have a medical marijuana law. Now, imagine that, right? And imagine as well that marijuana does not have any of those harmful things listed for what they were being prescribed instead, right? Including death. Death is one of the inherent risks that people take in taking these medications. And it's so ironic to me because they'll sit there and they'll bag on the tobacco industry and say it's the only product that when used as advertised will kill you, when you have these pharmaceuticals which are arguably designed for the same exact reason, to kill you under the guise of making you feel better, right? The ultimate delusion in that and the ultimate way of them mocking you, right? Thinking that they're helping you, but it's actually only crippling you further. Now, look at how these rates of prescriptions dropped, though, in these states with medicinal marijuana, right? Pain prescriptions dropped 1,826. Anxiety, 562. Even something such as psychosis, 519. And the thing to really, really consider with this as well is that for each script that is not written for one of these prescription drugs, it is not just that one individual affected by that, because it seems increasingly rare that any script is contained simply to the individual anymore. It is tapped into by a child living in the house or another family member, or they are just outright gotten to be sold because it is a very lucrative market right now. And so you see this, though, and so this is the kind of concrete evidence that you want to see in making this sort of case. Now, what's very interesting here is what they have written up about what the pharmaceutical companies are doing and the extent of their reach to prevent a lot of progressive things from happening. So check this out. They found in a case recently uncovered that the Department of Health and Human Services recommended that naturally derived THC, the main psychoactive component of marijuana, be moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act, a less restrictive category that would acknowledge the drug's medical use and make it easier to research and prescribe. Several months after HHS submitted its recommendation, at least one drug company that manufactures a synthetic version of THC, which would presumably have to compete with any natural derivatives, wrote to the DEA to express opposition to rescheduling natural THC, citing, quote, the abuse potential in terms of the need to grow and cultivate substantial crops of marijuana in the United States, end quote. It then says the DEA ultimately rejected the HHS recommendation without explanation, right? And so It's a pretty obvious line, I want to say there. All right. They are losing a huge chunk of money. Now, one thing I do want to caution, though, with the legal marijuana is the fact that I do think there is something to be said about the fact that the government arguably has, even though it's still federally illegal, a lot more oversight of this crop and a lot more control over what is happening to it. So be very mindful of the levels from strains that you are buying. Make sure it is not overloaded with THC, that there is an actual balance of CBD in there as well. Too much THC will cause a lot of those psychoactive effects and just feel psychotic and less just good and in vibe, right? Because what you want is for it to align you with that right frequency, that right level of just being and existence. And these improper strains will only worsen the grip of this current frequency. So be very mindful of that. And let me get back onto track here, though. So the other bit that we have here, just talking about these drug overdoses, right, now kill more people than gun homicides and car crashes combined. And so again, this is just talking about this ever worsening epidemic here in America. I just want you to see this is an article from this year. And so I'll leave all of this for you, of course, but you can see the big problem here, right? Everything's still on the rise. And remember, I did a video talking about the rehab industry and how it's just that. It's a $32 billion a year industry on the rise, right? And all of this is absolutely connected, right? All of that rehab, or I want to say 98% of it, is still connected to AA, and again, all those occult pieces, and again, them just mocking you at every single turn that you're looking for help. Now, this I just thought was worth mentioning. It says in some states, doctors have filled out more painkiller prescriptions than there are people. I don't at all doubt it, right? And so again, I'll leave all of this for you so you can read through here. Obviously, drug companies making a lot of money off of the opioids. Painkillers often prescribed for long periods of time, even though there's no evidence they effectively treat chronic pain, right? It's like there's no evidence that marijuana helps anything, right? But that's Schedule 1, and these remain Schedule 2 through 4. You also have here their anti-anxiety drugs are involved in more overdoses as well. So again, all of these things that we saw in states that had legalized marijuana, the prescription rates for them were falling. And so therefore, a lot of these numbers that we're seeing over here, you would anticipate to fall as well, right? And again, because we're looking at benzos, remember we were looking at those over here as well. Our DEA sheet, it's all there for you. So let's keep going here, though. I thought there was something in here that would link us in with cancer. And you can see connections to heroin. But so here I wanted to show you this bit, and it could be because the cannabis bit is supposed to come first here, but I'm going to get lost in it. So let's just keep moving here. So the chemotherapy stuff I've got for you is just looking at who is benefiting again from these pharmaceutical drugs, because there is more and more evidence. And yes, it's from this article right here. Let's go ahead and pull up our highlights, or not. There we go. There we go. Chemical found in marijuana stops cancer from spreading. That's a big thing I'm looking for on this. Again, this is something from the Business Insider, but again, kept at the Schedule 1 drug level that it is. And so I want to see what's the number one thing to fight cancer, right? Chemotherapy. And so you have this warning here. This is an article from the Telegraph. And a very interesting study that was conducted. You see, this is an article written last year, but you can see the opening thing is saying chemotherapy research showing that cancer drugs are killing up to 50% of patients in some hospitals. And again, their time frame for this is looking at how many people died within 30 days of starting chemotherapy. And so it's, again, a very troubling article, but very important to read through and look at these mortality rates and how just common death is. And again, for those of you unfamiliar, chemotherapy is simply killing everything. It doesn't discriminate between good and bad cells. It is just an all-out poisoning of the body in an attempt to kill the cancer cells. Very painful and agonizing experience described by many, but check this out. Cancer as a business model, $100 billion spent on chemotherapy drugs last year. So that's May 2015 that this is published. So 2014, $100 billion. And all of these cancer rates, all of the rates we're talking about, it's all on the rise. People's ever worsening health. But so I'll leave this article for you. But this one is just fascinating, though. You can see in America more money is spent to treat cancer than to treat any other disease. In fact, according to NBC, $100 billion was spent last year alone. All right, so up 10% from 2013 when it was $75 billion. So continue, you can see here, grow at a rate of 6 to 8% a year. It's a huge industry that they're not really going to let much get in the way of, right? And again, you can see all the money that they still want to make, right? Latest cancer drugs, again, relative to this article, 12,500 a month. Outrageous. Just outrageous. And you can see here just more and more talking about just the increases of cancer, right? Saying we have lost the war on cancer. At the beginning of the last century, 1 in 20 would get cancer. In the 1940s, it was 1 out of 16. In the 1970s, 1 out of 10. And now it is 1 out of 3 will get cancer in their lifetime. Now look at this as well. It says once you do develop cancer, doctors are not allowed to prescribe any alternative treatments for you. They are only permitted to offer you the treatments the system tells them they must offer. And of course, one of these is chemotherapy, an absolutely nightmarish treatment that often kills the patient before it kills the cancer. The following is how one woman described her experience with chemo. And I'll let you go ahead and read through this. And again, you can see here, this is, I think, the most important thing to keep in mind here. But in the end, there's a tremendous amount of doubt regarding whether chemo does much good at all. Just consider the words of Dr. Ralph Moss, the author of the book entitled The Cancer Industry. In the end, there is no proof that chemotherapy actually extends life in the vast majority of cases, and this is the great lie about chemotherapy, that somehow there is a correlation between shrinking a tumor and extending the life of a patient. So why do oncologists push chemo so hard? Well, it's because they make a tremendous amount of money doing it. Oncologists are some of the highest paid doctors. Their average income is increasing faster than any other specialist in the medical field, and more than half their income comes from selling and administering chemotherapy. So, yeah, oncologists make a huge profit. As much as 2/3 of their income in some cases from chemotherapy drugs. 2/3. Oncologists buy these drugs direct at wholesale prices, then they mark them up and bill the insurance companies. This legal profiteering on drugs by doctors is unique to the cancer treatment world. They're making money off the drugs that they insist you take to save your life. That's a huge conflict of interest. They're selling you the drugs and charging you for the privilege of putting them in your body. No other doctor can do that. And so Deeply troubling, right? And you can see why it would then be in the best interests to keep, right, marijuana this god-awful thing. So one other thing I want to show on this, it lessens side effects from treating hepatitis C and increases treatment effectiveness. So why this is so incredibly important is because I have this article that I just pulled up from May of this year off of CNN. It says new hepatitis C infections tripled due to opioid epidemic. So the number of new nationally reported infections with the virus swelled from 850 in 2010 to 2,436 cases in 2015. Highest rates among young people between 20 and 29 who inject drugs. All right, so this is according to the CDC. However, the CDC estimates the true number is much higher, about 34,000 new infections nationally for 2015, since hepatitis C has few symptoms and most newly infected people do not get diagnosed. So what do you think about that, right? The number they put out is just over 2,000, and they estimate the number to be closer to 34,000, right? That's insane, and it's because of these drugs, right? And something that could help them is kept to Schedule 1. And that's just so amazing. It amazes me. It really does. But take a look at this too. A really big piece of why, right, cannabis has been kept at Schedule 1 is this whole war on drugs, right? Targeting select demographics, profiteering off of petty crime, right? Supporting the prison industrial complex, all these things. But take a look at this here. I just think this is fascinating. Since the war on drugs began back in the 1970s, the U.S. government has spent nearly $1 trillion towards eradicating the drug problem in this country. In 2015 alone, $36 billion was spent on the war on drugs, but that number was just for law enforcement and some social services and does not take into account the cost of incarceration for nonviolent drug offenders once they are arrested and sentenced to jail. For that, roughly $80 billion is spent each year on incarcerating American prisoners. Since 50% of our prison population is serving time for drug-related crimes, that means that an additional $40 billion needs to be added to our $36 billion for the war on drugs, bringing that grand annual total to about $76 billion. And then so here you can see how that connects with how much they spend on education and how much is just wasted. And as we saw from all of these things, the drug problem is continuing to get worse. This is a completely ineffective and archaic program. And again, a lot of disappointing stuff in there. A lot of disappointing stuff. A lot of mocking from the higher ups, just laughing at how we keep this thing going and don't see what's right in front of us. I mean, yeah, you have to kind of see it. So in any case, with all of that now, back to this coding, there's just a few things that I want to get out here for all of you. So now, if we were to go back and go through here, and again, I'm not going to play this, but you can see there's a little bit more that comes up here when he's saying goodbye on this robocall. And it gives the name of the company that this rabbi works for, Hassan Pfeffer Incorporated. Now, this is an incredibly interesting piece here, right? So that Jewish value of 828, A is very important because an English value of 828 is in fact the same as the Pez theory, or Pez theory itself, right? It's also the same as Donald Trump, Master Mason, all these huge things. Now, looking at it this way, though, and in connection, right? Remember, we're talking about all these things with the 666, the hexagram. 828, if we break it down, look at this. 6 times 6 times 6 is 216, which if we mirror and add, again, very popular in this occult encryption, we do get our 828 yet again, right? And that's a number that's a mirror of itself, speaking to the importance of this. So you can see that, right? Critical pieces. Now notice as well references to devils, the system, hyperinflation, key to it all, okay? All these pieces, the 6-pointed star of David, again, It's right there for you. I'm not going to play even just a second of it, because I don't want this to get pulled. But look here as well, because you see desolations are determined and the rising of the phoenix. Now, this really harkens to me the imagery on this Economist cover, right? Desolations being determined. This is something that we've talked about pretty extensively in the past. Again, a whole piece of this ritual magic importance throughout all of this. But so, again, I've got a whole video on that cover that you can look into, Rising of the Phoenix, all connected with that. Now, if we take that name, Hassenpfeffer, on its own, do notice how interesting it is that we get Rothschild, right? And now this brings us all the way back, right, to what we were talking about in the beginning of the video here, with the Rothschilds and this hexagram, right? The importance of it, the just kind of perpetuation of it overall throughout society. So it's very important that I'm able to bring that back to you full circle, and you can see how all of that connects. All right, again, references to illumination, nuclear war, black sun. And so let's take a look at one other piece of what is written here. Star of David Times. So remember back to the beginning of the video, the very first little shot that we had here. It's the article that he's said to be calling on behalf of. So again, we've looked into this Star of David bit all throughout. But notice now, infernal spirituality. Now remember, this having to do with, right, hell or demonic entities. So dark or demonic spirituality. Having that same coding, right, as Star of David Times. So again, you see, again, this mocking. Look as well, you see Wiccan cult leading us all to extinction, religious extremists, okay, 1946. Now, speaking of all of that, and do notice as well, since Temple of Understanding came up earlier, as well as United Nations, it is located at 777 United Nations Plaza, and I did, again, do that whole video for you. But so 1946, right, written out number. And remember as well that United Nations does come up in the coding for OI, as well as divide and conquer, right? Change is inevitable, rule everyone, the crown snake, these huge pieces. So getting back here though, 1946, Star of David Times, is when the UN held its first meeting that year. Big deal. League of Nations held its final meeting that year. Now you can see these really big pieces came in here. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization was created that year as well, right? Purpose of UNESCO was to prevent the future possibility of a world war by nurturing a worldwide peace through working together on educational, scientific, and cultural issues, all right? You can also see that UNICEF was created that year, right? International Children's Emergency Fund. This is also the year that the Atomic Energy Act, the McMahon Act, is signed into law and creates the Atomic Energy Commission. So as you can see, the AEC was used to oversee the creation of nuclear weapons and to research and implement the nuclear power industry. The peaceful use of nuclear energy. The AEC would also be used to regulate the nuclear power industry until 1974, when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was created. A year after the act was passed, the commission was created, and power over the nuclear program was transferred from the Manhattan Project and the U.S. military to the AEC. So again, because we see a lot of nuclear coding throughout all of this. As I say, you should always pause and look through these. But again, Hassenpfeffer has nuclear war tied in there. And so again, when we're looking into these pieces and seeing this commission coming in for peaceful use of the energy, it becomes very critical, right? So notice as well, 1946, first programmable computer comes into being in Pennsylvania. But so let's keep going here. You've got this tidal wave, and this is what we're really looking at, the Bikini Atoll atomic tests, right? So US starts these, and we'll look at the date on that in just a second for you. But go down here, check out who's born this year. There's our boy, Donald Trump. You also have George W. Bush, huge man of interest, and Freddie Mercury, who we've done a video on relatively recently as well. So what I want you to see here, though, is not only do we have this Bikini Atoll atomic test, but bikinis actually go on sale on July 5th in Paris that same year. And so what was very interesting is the first Bikini Atoll test was on June 30th, 1946, and then the bikinis come out 6 days later. It's kind of a big deal, right? We're talking so much about this number 6. 144, of course, a huge number as far as being a perfect harmonious number and said to, right, be associated with these ideas of revelations. And so it's very, very interesting how all of that just continues to loop in there. So let's take a look one more time back over here, though. Star of David times, right? English and simple values. There we have Donald John Trump, all the way written out, as well as Judgment and the Star. Now, again, hearkening back to this Economist cover we've talked so very much about in these two cards that are tilted on here, right? Judgment and the Star. And of course, now all of this information connecting this hexagram with this card is very interesting and moving forward. But again, there's a tremendous amount to look through here. I've gone over this at length in the past for you. But notice one last thing, though, because you have foretold by the Bible, Book of Revelation, secrets kept hidden, right? All these big things. And there is a reference to Revelation in this Colbert segment. If we look at this number as 1666, instead of keeping it separated by its hyphens there, a Jewish value of 1666 does give us the same coding as a Revelation 6 written out. So this is very important, right? This is a very critical chapter about the seals, the opening of them, the darkness, right? What will happen. So very, very important that that's written in there as well. Now, if we take this one step further, just kind of last information on the way out here. The last name of the rabbi, Schmedrickwitz, however Colbert wants to say it, that is the same as, right, the Pez theory, as well as the number 7, great architect, hiding the truth in the order of the rose, right, Rosicrucians. Huge with all of this symbolism as well. So if you want to also take a look here on the way out, there's coding for 10,000 bagels and Jewish conspiracy. Again, other pieces that were in that segment that just glean more information. Very last one, right? There is no coincidence. It ties all of this together. So, right, is it all part of CERN? Is it all part of this Mount Athena sort of volcanic eruption that's down there? But 7 trumpets is written out there. And again, with that reference there to Revelation 6, it is very compelling to look at that. So, you know, that's what I've got for you today. Lot to consider, as I say, just mocked at every turn, right? Whether it's political, social, drug, religious, entertainment, it's all there. So I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and consider this information. And I really hope it in some way helps you just, better understand things around you and hopefully lessen any sort of grief that, has come from that. It's, a lot of it, it's, I'm one to say we're just too far along in everything. We had a chance a long time ago to, stand up and stop paying, for these just ridiculous and arbitrary things that we pay for, and demand a shift in things. But, right, divide and conquer, constantly kept at arms with one another. And, all these trivial and petty things that are just, superficial are the things that keep us divided when it matters most. And, as a result of that, we find ourselves where we are, where the likelihood of people truly coming together is, next to, I just feel impossible. But, that's just me. I could be proven wrong. The one thing that seems to be able to do the balance right is this idea of these cataclysmic events that overturn everything, and make people realize they have to come together. They have to look past those pieces that keep them apart. I think the one thing I might have forgotten to mention in this, in talking about this hexagram, is Crowley's unicursal hexagram. In that it differs from this traditional one. Instead of fusing the two opposing energies, the two dualities, it's actually drawn in one singular motion without lifting the pen, right? Hence suggesting singularity to begin with. We're only convinced that things are separate or different. And so there's a huge line of philosophy that goes in with that, obviously. And for those of you still watching this video, right, tremendous amount of sense that must make. So again, thank you very much to everybody who supports the channel. Please continue to just do whatever it is that you do that helps you, grow and live a more fulfilling life. So one more time, thank you so very much for watching, and please be well.